Yes, the topic of Joe Rogan will not go away. It has been dominating the news for a very long time now. And our former president has weighed in. So let me go ahead and show you his take here. Statement by Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States. Joe Rogan is an interesting and popular guy, but he's got to stop apologizing to the fake news and radical left maniacs and lunatics. How many ways can you say you're sorry? Joe, just go about what you do so well and don't let them make you look weak and frightened. That's not you, and it never will be. So that's Trump's take on the matter. I have a somewhat controversial reaction to this. Trump is half right. So let me explain what I mean by that. Joe, by apologizing, even the first time, and you could call it wasn't a full apology, it was like a semi-apology, right? For the, vaccine misinformation stuff. By doing that, it didn't satiate everybody who was a critic of Joe. He was operating under the assumption, look, I'm acting in good faith. I assume all my critics are acting in good faith. So if I'm open and honest and I say this, then, everybody will get along and we could all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. It's like caricature, but that's sort of the gist of it. If I'm operating in good faith, I think my critics are operating in good faith, I'll let them know and then we'll be okay. The opposite happened. They saw the semi-apology and they smelled blood in the water and they were like, oh, we got this dude. Let's go in for the kill. Let's go for the jugular. So the sharks did what sharks do. And then they kept digging. And by the way, they're going to keep doing this. In fact, I see them continuing to do this. I saw a number of headlines since then. Here's Joe Rogan in a 2006 comedy bit making fun of somebody who's mentally handicapped. Here's Joe Rogan saying something sexist about Angelina Jolie or whatever. All these new headlines. Oh my God, he said this, he said this. Because as soon as he, showed some vulnerability, they were like, oh, well, then we can get him to totally buckle and probably force Spotify sufficiently enough to get them to pull Joe, especially if, some big name artists like Taylor Swift or Drake or whoever decides to pull out of Spotify because of Rogan or whatever, So it is sort of true that when you showed the vulnerability, they come in for the kill and they crush you. They don't, nobody accepts an apology anymore. For anything. It doesn't matter how open and honest and fair you are. It's just like you once did a bad thing, or I think you were a bad person, and so you are forever tarred with that no matter what happens moving forward. That just seems to be the way it works. So in one sense, Trump is kind of right. Trump is right. But now let me give the flip side argument, which I think is also true. The flip side argument is, I think Joe, he genuinely felt bad that there are people out there who don't know him and they saw this compilation of him saying the N-word 22 times and Joe's watching that thing and number one, this looks terrible because it does look terrible to anybody. Number two, people who don't know me have no idea what the context is, so it sounds like I'm just calling people the N-word in a vicious way and I'm equivalent to David Duke or Richard Spencer and I hate black people. That's what it sounds like. So I think Joe genuinely felt bad that there were people who don't know him who were offended and hurt by him using that language. And so Joe, being an honest guy, is like, look, I want to sort of set the record straight and say what I feel bad for and also give the context. And he did exactly that. He went out there and he said what he felt bad for, and he gave the context. Now, some people might say, even with the context, I don't accept that. Okay, fair enough. But the context definitely makes clear he's not David Duke, and he's not some, hardcore Bull Connor racist like that compilation makes him look like. So I think from Joe's perspective, he was just being true to himself. And so the first apology, he basically said, you guys say I'm doing misinformation. Well, mainstream media did a lot of misinformation, and this pandemic has been evolving, and some things that we thought were fake turned out to be true, and so I'm on this ride just like everybody else, but to say I'm the purveyor of misinformation, I think that's a little misleading. We're all trying our best out here. He said that, and then he also, said, look, I'll try to do better. I'll try to study more for the podcast where I have people on with controversial opinions, and I'll try to balance it out with pro-vaccine people when I have on anti-vaccine people, and I'm okay with the banners that are like, a link to more official COVID information. I'm fine with that. So, yeah, that was the first apology. I think he was doing what he felt was the right thing to do and being true to himself. And then even with the second apology, I think he was doing what he felt was the right thing to do, and he was being true to himself. And I think that if he didn't do both apologies, I think he'd have trouble sleeping at night. because he wanted to clear the record and he wanted to clear his name. But having said that, it is also true that by doing that, now everybody's a critic. And so there are people who will just never accept the apology, and now they want to go in for the kill more. That's a lot of people. And then there are other people who say, look, you tactically and strategically fucked up because now you're making people think you did something wrong when really in context, you didn't feel like you were doing anything wrong. And so this weakness is just going to get you crushed, and you have to stand up and actually defend yourself in a way. Because that's what Trump always used to do. And Trump did it to a fault. Like, Trump literally, even when Trump was dead wrong, he would never apologize. But the fact that he puffed his chest out and he, was a bull in a china shop, it doesn't silence the critics, but it makes them appear like they're playing a losing hand. Because if every time you just swat aside whatever the complaint is, and you're like, fuck off, then, it does sort of go away. It does sort of go away in due time, and probably quicker than if you, feed into it and grant legitimacy and credibility to it. So I think what Trump is saying here is half right from a strategic perspective. It would have been much different if he didn't apologize or if he defended himself a little bit more. But because Joe, I think, was just being true to himself and honest to himself, and he genuinely felt bad for people who were offended and hurt, I think he just followed his heart and did the thing that he felt like he had to do and that he should do. But yeah, you guys know, at the end of the day, I would say my biggest disagreement with Rogan in this whole thing is not the apologies, because he was just being true to himself and speaking his mind. I think the fact that 113 episodes are now pulled, and one of them is mine, and granted, we learned now that he indeed did say N-I-G-G-A in my podcast with him. He was quoting something from Kanye, and he read it. I still think, worst case scenario, you just bleep out the word and put the thing back up on Spotify. But they actually pulled it down, and it's gone for good now. So I think that was the big mistake. I mean, even going to Spotify originally was that was the original sin. Was like, let me be part of Spotify where they're paying me a lot of money, because now, like it or not, he becomes like the face of the entire organization. And so now he doesn't just have to answer for himself. He has to answer for an entire company, for the CEO, for the employees who work there. And now stuff he says affects, the market value of the company. When he was at YouTube, even though you're not perfectly independent at YouTube, you are more independent at YouTube because he didn't have a contract with, YouTube management. He didn't know YouTube management. He didn't talk to YouTube management. He was just a guy on the platform like anybody else. So YouTube didn't necessarily have to answer much for what he did because there was that buffer between them. So maybe the original sin was going to Spotify in the first place. I don't like the fact that the episodes were pulled down. But there you have it. Donald Trump, who always swats aside scandals, and he's a bull in the china shop, for better or worse. Sometimes he's dead wrong when he does it, but he's telling Joe, hey man, they sense weakness, and that's going to embolden them. It's not going to make them accept your apology and be, more fair-minded. That's his take. I gave you both sides of it, and you guys determined for yourself what the best path forward was. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.